or wrongly, there is a very strong public perception that pit bulls can be a dangerous animal. And in Riverside County, 20% of the animals that are in our shelter are identified as pit bulls and pit bull mixes. 30% of the animals that are put down, nice way of saying they kill them, are pit bulls and pit bull mixes. Part of it is public perception, and it's driven by a lot of things, and some of it is inaccurate, but it is a real perception. So I would really like to not make so many pit bulls.
It's called breed-specific legislation, but if you actually read the laws, there's nothing specific about it. There's circumstances that go along with those attacks that are consistent almost every time. It's either a roaming stray dog that's loose, unsupervised by the owner's nowhere to be seen, or it's an unsupervised child that ends up in a backyard per se with a dog that's not a family dog. It's in the yard, it's chained or fenced, tethered. The child wanders out unsupervised. Normally in that circumstance, if the dog wasn't chained or tethered, the dog would just flee. The way most people talk about pit bulls is just a generic term that is referencing a mixed breed dog. And anytime something happens with that dog, it's always the pit portion of that gets the headlines. Even though it's a mixed dog, nothing else makes those headlines.
What are some of the other common misconceptions you think are about these type of dogs that people need to understand and need to correct?
That they're dogs, first and foremost, because there's a lot of tonality that people put out that basically state they're separate from the dog population, which is completely untrue. They're dogs. When we are referencing attacks, we are referencing 10 attacks, 20 a year. There's millions of pit bulls in the country. There's tens of thousands in this city, in the county. Robert Miller, who runs the shelter, stated as much. And these are just numbers that come from the registered dogs, which is a low fraction of the total dogs that you have in these areas. Thousands and thousands of dogs, countrywide, millions of actual pit bulls have never done anything. And they all blanketly take the blame. It's all implied that they're all inherently vicious, engineered differently, aggressive. I attended the county meeting. Tons of times they reference these dogs as vicious, aggressive, inherently dangerous, engineered differently.
Deaths and maiming, mauled to death.
These potentially dangerous animals.
Face ripped off.
Their violent behavior.
Vicious bites.
Engineered morphologically.
Attacked by 2 pit bulls. Death and maiming. Attacked by a pit bull. Vicious attacks.
Jawbone structure, viciousness.
Incredibly vicious.
They have this instinct to want to kill. Genetically engineer them. Vicious, kill people and maim people. Very vicious, dangerous animals. Bred to be dangerous animals. We need to protect the public from these vicious animals. Engineered to cause bodily injury.
No one's making this up. This is real.
It's time to say enough is enough. Stop the killing, or at least stop a process that will stop the killing.
The implication is that they're different. And then they want to come back and, well, it's not about that.
There's nothing in the city's ordinance that prevents people from having pit bulls. And I agree with Josh. There are some wonderful pit bulls out there. I've met some really nice pit bulls. I've met some that weren't so nice too. But that honestly is true of almost any breed. Riverside's ordinance has, I think, a reasonable level of specificity. It does identify Staffordshire Terriers, American Pit Bull Terriers, and Pit Bull mixes. If there's a challenge to what is a particular dog, there's a panel that will be put together that will make that determination. Fair determination.
I've heard this point made repeatedly, which is, this is all well and good if you want to do this type of ordinance, but the fact of the matter is if you have someone who wants their pit bull to be mean, wants to be aggressive, is basically not a responsible pet owner, probably isn't following the law anyway, what's the point of having a law that, maybe is going to crack down on people trying to do the right thing while the people who are going to continue to ignore it?
We want to actively enforce this law. City employees who are meter readers, and there's nobody who knows where dogs that they're afraid of are more than a meter reader. What is this dog, and is it altered or not? Pay the county Department of Animal Services to canvass neighborhoods every year.
With all due respect, the claim that this new ordinance is going to be enforced, the track record doesn't exist for enforcement. Like I already stated once, there's already a dangerous dog law in both county and city. And city actually has a mandatory spay and neuter law for all pets. It's a secondary law. They have the ability to change that if they want to. But the law's already there for all dogs, and they're doing this on top of that. Pit bulls are dogs too, so they fall into that first law, which is not being enforced, just like the dangerous dog law isn't being enforced, just like the leash law isn't being enforced when a roaming dog attacks, maims, kills somebody, regardless of the breed. How it's spelled out in the ordinance, the breeds of dog. Well, yeah, in text it's spelled out, but visually, how are you going to identify these dogs? You can create a panel and put 2, 3, 4 people on it, but there's studies out there that show that shelter workers can't even identify their own impounded dogs. There's a Victoria Voice study, people can look it up online. 73% of the time, this is overall a number, 73% of the time, impounded dogs went misidentified when compared to actual DNA evidence.
One of the things Mr. Gardner raised in the beginning was the idea that we need laws like this because the shelter is just a preponderance of these types of dogs.
Yeah, spay and neutering is good. My own dogs, I have 3 pit bull mixes. They're all spayed and neutered. So I'm not against spay and neutering at all. I find the actual mandated laws to be problematic because they target specific facets of the community. Lower income people and low income spay and neuter clinics aren't readily available. Basically, all this does when these laws go into effect is make your shelter intakes go up, which in turn makes killing go up. They not only have 1, but they have 3 buildings at their county facility. 3 buildings that are off limits to the public. Public cannot go. They store, majority of dogs that they store in those buildings are pit bulls. They're not stored for a day or 2 and then moved to the adoption floor. They're stored there indefinitely and then moved to the kill room and killed. And then he wants to claim that adoption numbers are low. Well, no one can see the dogs. And why do you think adoption numbers are low just in a general sense? Because this kind of stuff is going on. These stereotypes are perpetuated by this type of stuff. And it's not fair, because like I said, there's millions of these dogs who are innocent, mine included.
I would like to get rid of backyard breeding of all dogs, not just pits. I think the issue is for dogs that are loose. Yes, people break the law. It's illegal to rob banks, but people still rob banks. We don't want to wipe out the breed. We don't want to prevent people from having them. But we do want to get them spayed and neutered.
Given that, particularly with local governments, still, particularly here in the Inland Empire, still recovering from the recession, we don't have maybe the money that we used to. I know Animal Control has had its budget cut significantly since the Great Recession hit. I mean, how do you advance that goal? How much education, I guess, and how much outreach you can do when, perhaps there are limited resources, or maybe you don't see them limited at all, but I want to give you a chance to talk about that, advance that education aspect.
Well, yeah, I think there's plenty of resources. They just need to be shifted. Resources are being used on certain things and wasted on certain things, where if there was a different perspective running the shelter, for example, because that's where change starts, is the top. You need a compassionate director, and I don't believe Mr. Miller is that. There's a lot of different things that can be done instead of just stashing dogs and killing them. You can reach out to the communities. You don't have to villainize these dogs in the press. You don't have to put out these laws and double down and triple down on laws that already exist. Most people don't know that these laws exist. I'm here trying to inform people of this, but common sense says the law's already there. It's not enforced. How are you going to enforce the second law? So often the public is not engaged and not brought into the process. Like I stated earlier, a lot of these laws affect low-income communities. Some people argue that that's part of the point, to target these communities. I'm not going to claim that, but bottom line is these people don't have the ability to even sometimes afford $100 spay and neuter operation, or $125. When you have vouchers that are $35, it's still like $80 out. You have government coming around and basically taking people's private property, which is what dogs are. They're property in the eyes of the law. And one of the most troubling aspects, and this is why I'm holding this paper, Section 6 of this law, both county and city, the identification process is massively flawed. But they actually put into text that they will determine what the breed of dog is. That becomes the evidence. That becomes the facts. And then it's the public's, the burden of proof shifts to the actual person that got their dog taken. That's unconstitutional, and this law will probably be struck down because of that verbiage, and I can't wait until it is.
I would disagree with the last point on the identification and the taking. I think it's intended to be a participative process, just as Josh identifies dogs as pit bulls, others do too, and there's no question, it is subjective. DNA is maybe not the best way to look at it, and it is expensive. If we're going to require people to spay and neuter animals, we need to make it possible for them to do that.
In regards to me identifying dogs as pit bulls, I do as well. Everybody does, visually, because that's really all, that most people initially use. But I don't do it to put a negative connotation on a dog, though. That's the difference. I'm not looking at a dog and saying it is this and therefore it's bad. And that's what the pro-BSL side of this does. Consistently, constantly.
Well, why not just pit bulls? Why don't we have an ordinance on the books for every dog?
There is,
or every Well, I mean, I'll let you jump in on that. I mean, yeah, this whole idea that we ought to just not do this for pit bulls. We ought to do this for every dog.
There already is a mandatory spay and neuter with city for every dog. So I would like the answer to that question as well. That is the initial rational question that everyone should have if they know about it, and I want the answer to that as well.
Okay,
so.
Mr. Gardner?
Be happy to provide it. As Josh pointed out, that is a secondary enforcement. It's picked up as a stray, or it bites somebody, or damages somebody else's pet, and they call and take possession of the animal. Then, to get the animal back, you need to get it spayed or neutered.
That's a good thing, though.
I agree. One is, it's just such a large population that it's very difficult to accomplish it. And the other, in all honesty, is a matter of political will. There is, just as there is a level of public objection to requiring that pit bulls be spayed and neutered, there's an even greater outcry if you do all dogs in general. And I don't think most governmental bodies have the political wherewithal to withstand that pressure. Because of the way pits are characterized and many people perceive them, the political possibility of accomplishing it at that level does exist. I don't think you could do that for Cocker Spaniels.
So you're going to take advantage of it because you're admitting that most people are uneducated about pit bulls, so you're going to then just throw them under the bus? I mean, I also pointed out that the law is a secondary enforcement, but it doesn't have to be. They can change that. They have the power to change that if they wanted to. They can go in, restructure the law. How it stands right now, it says, well, if there's a roaming dog, it comes in, it can't go back out until it's spayed and neutered, and that is a good thing. That's definitely a good thing. All shelter animals are not supposed to leave the shelter unless they're spayed and neutered. That is how it should work. Mr. Gardner sits on the council. He has the ability to suggest changes to the laws. The council has the ability to change these laws. So I feel like that question was flat out dodged because, yes, it is a secondary enforcement, but they can change it. They have the power to change it whenever they want to.
Okay. Mr. Gardner?
Josh is right. The council could change it. I don't believe that there are votes to do that, and fair or not, the public perception does help drive the political will that allowed this for pit bulls. It's too big a step. Government hasn't got the guts to do it.
Well, regardless, I mean, if you can acknowledge something as unfair or possibly unfair, I don't know your personal, specifics of your personal stance on this, but if you can acknowledge something as being possibly unfair, we're talking about willpower here. Regardless of whether there's the votes or not, why don't you stand up and say it's unfair, unjust? That's what I'm doing. This is an unjust law.
You saw at the hearings, you got people on the one hand talking about relatives of theirs, perhaps who they blame pit bulls for attack. On the other hand, you have people who love these dogs sincerely and believe that that these laws are unfair. And is there room for compromise in any part of this?
I feel like that's all I've put forth is other ideas. You referenced the person that the Board of Supervisors spoke. There was a couple people that spoke of attacks. The very last commenter was, a lady who had her granddaughter mauled by a baby pit bull. That was her words. It was like a decade ago or something. And the next sentence out of her mouth was, the babysitter left my niece for 3 hours and went to the grocery store. That goes in one ear and out the other of a lot of people. So few attacks happen, and there's common denominators in almost every one, and yet this pro-BSL lobby, anti-pit bull lobby, and I'm not saying Mike's part of that, but in general, the people that exist out there that push these laws, they pay no attention to those common sense things that are there in almost every attack, fatality. They're there, and it just gets ignored.
When you hear about a dog attack, whether it's on people or other pets, the predominant dog that it's attributed to is a pit bull. I don't think that's probably always right, but you almost never hear of other breeds being involved in an attack on a person with serious injury. It does happen. Any large dog that bites can do serious damage to somebody. I've never heard of anybody being mauled to death by chihuahuas, even a pack of them.
The ASPCA says the media doesn't want anything to do with it. They're not going to report stories unless it involves a pit bull. Another component of that is media coverage, news coverage. Quotes in a newspaper is what these numbers are based in. They're not based on any evidence. The people tallying fatalities and attributing them to pit bulls the evidence is, well, the newspaper said it. Most of these attacks, fatalities, there's never any even picture or image of the dog. These numbers are so small, it's cherry-picked information, and the evidence just patently doesn't exist. And yet it's just attributed to a pit bull, and that goes out and that's multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. And there have been numerous and many fatalities that didn't involve pit bulls. Not a chihuahua per se, but there's a heck of a lot of breeds out there, and a lot of breeds have killed people. And that's not to say that any breed should be judged or discriminated against because of that. That's one dog. It's an individual dog, and that's where we need to focus on. Individual dog's behavior, individual person's behavior. More importantly than that, because that's where the dog is getting the bad behavior from. He mentioned a little while ago, people rob banks or something like that. That's not going to stop. You're right. But what if I went in and robbed a bank? I'm a white guy. You're going to pass a law against all white guys then? That's what this is.
The important points that I hope people remember is Riverside's ordinance doesn't attempt to ban any breed of dog. It doesn't prevent people from having them. It doesn't prevent people from breeding them. Josh is right. The number of dogs that bite people or other animals is a small percentage of the overall population, and there are not good, from a scientific perspective, statistics on dog bites or fatalities at all. Because we just, as a society, we don't keep those records in that kind of a manner. The animal control officer that goes to the scene, or a police officer that goes to the scene, says that dog's a so-and-so. That's what goes in the report. I think the media in general may play up a pit bull attack over, say, a German Shepherd attack. Is it fair? No. But I think it's reality. And having that sense of concern in the public lets government get to the point of mandating, at least for pits, the mandatory